those earlier. Is there any board member that wants to pull any other items off the consent agenda? Seeing none, we need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Ms. McQuinn, seconded by Mrs. Whitfield. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Takes us to items of new business. The first item is BRD1. This is a board-initiated agenda item. I recommend the board discuss the next steps needed for the acting general counsel agreement and take action as necessary. Mrs. Rico, would you care to come on at this point and tell us where we're at on that so the board can discuss?
Thank you. The board, this item was necessary because the board acted last week, and in that action referenced bringing back a contract for this week, and there just wasn't a lot of time to bring that forward. And also it appeared clear that following the usual process that a contract would be negotiated and then brought forward through the chair or another appointed board member for further consideration. So the status is essentially, I think you all received a memo from Ms. Bernard. She's available for comment as she's part of the invited agenda participants today. So if you wanted to ask her questions directly, I'm sure she's available. But that's really the issue, is to get the board's direction for next steps.
Thank you. Any board members want to speak on this? So we need a motion to appoint someone to work with Mr. Shaw.
Before I make that motion, go ahead and finish what you were going to say, Mr. Barbieri, in case it changes what I want to make a motion on.
I was just going to ask somebody to make a motion for one of us to work with the General Counsel's office to bring back a proposed contract for Ms. Bernard to the board for discussion and possible approval. So,
okay, I move that the board authorizes the chair to meet with Mrs. Bernard and negotiate an interim contract, not to exceed 2 years, but try to work out the deals or the details on that for a 2-year contract.
We have a second by Mrs. Whitfield. Discussion. Dr. Robinson.
I definitely will support that. I just want to add to that it will automatically come back to us in 6 months for reconsideration on the salary.
Okay, that's a modification to Mr. Shaw's motion. Do we have a second modification? Second by Mrs. Whitfield. Is there any discussion on the modification? All in favor of the modification? Opposed?
Mr. Barbieri, I did want to say one thing really quickly. So in that 6 months, will there be an evaluation attached to that as well? I was thinking maybe we could add in an evaluation as a part of that after 6 months, so that we could include that as a part of the salary negotiations.
Okay. Dr. Robinson, you want to add that to your motion so that I don't have a third amendment on the floor?
No, I don't. It's just because I've kind of been here before, and I realized that in 6 months, it's part of that evaluation will actually reflect previous work done, and part of it will be the work done under the new administration, if you will. I appreciate the concept, but I'm not interested in a formal evaluation tool. We are saying that the reason that we're going through this is to save money. And so I just want to make sure that we have a point in time where we say we're going to stop and look at the financial aspects again. Otherwise, we put ourselves in a position quite honestly, of having a white female general counsel making X amount, having a black female general counsel by definition making lesser amount. And so I want to make sure that we have a point in time that we are stating that we realize that we are taking a step that appears to be differentiated treatment, okay? And that I don't think we're about that. And so without adding to additional formalities, I just want to put the point in time where we will consider, depending on what the financial status of the district is, moving that salary closer to where her predecessor's salary is.
So before I call you Ms. McQuinn, before we have any further discussion, do we have a second on Mrs. Whitfield's motion? Okay, Mrs. Whitfield, so your motion fails for lack of a second. So now we're back to discussing Dr. Robinson's amended motion to add that 6-month provision. And Mrs. McQuinn?
Thank you. I wanted to clarify something anyway that I think is what we're doing. I totally agree about addressing the salary in 6 months. I want to make sure that I understand, because I agree. I mean, we do want to be equitable, looking at experience and all of that. But the other piece, we would still be saving money, even if the salary were adjusted, I think, because if I heard Ms. Rico correctly, we are agreeing, which I'd like on the record, we are agreeing that we won't be adding another attorney position to replace Ms. Bernard. I don't know if it was for 2 or 3 years. So we have savings there. We certainly would have money and still save a significant amount if Ms. Bernard's salary were adjusted. Is that correct?
Ms. Rico?
That is correct insofar as it is the intent, and it was the part of the proposal that the deputy general counsel position, which Ms. Bernard occupies at this moment, would be frozen throughout this period of time because it's not intended to replace her. So that position is going to be frozen, plus the savings of, so that's correct.
All right, any other discussion? Go ahead, Ms. Whitfield.
I'm thinking about this whole evaluation piece, which I know failed, but I'm curious, how do we give her feedback if we don't institute any sort of evaluation? Maybe we could do it after a year. I would like to be able to, I obviously could do it on my own, but I like that when we do the, when Ms. Rico gives us a report at the end of the year, we can, see how things have been going. And I feel like we have a responsibility to the district to make sure we're at least overseeing something. So explain to me how that works.
Well, I'll let Mr. Rico chime in on this, but I would assume this contract is going to have a similar provision to Mrs. Rico's, where there's an evaluation date, and we would evaluate at a certain time to determine whether we're satisfied with the work she's doing, whether at that point we want to give her any kind of increase, but if we haven't already done that. But there will be an evaluation provision in the contract, as we have in all of our contracts with our direct contracted employees. I don't know if you're frozen, Mrs. Whitfield, or just not moving. Did you want to comment on my comment?
I'm just curious about the timing. So I guess Ms. Rico's most recent submission of an annual report was when?
So for informational purposes, board, my annual evaluation is required in September. We're actually finalizing our report. It's based on fiscal year to fiscal year. So we'll be completing that and providing that to you within the next few months. And actually, I was hoping to present that before I left, if you want. But I think it's for your information, and it is the annual sort of wrap of the team's work and my work. So, if you want that live presentation or you just want it in a report, that's fine. But that's sort of the timing. That's the rhythm of the evaluations. So,
well, that works fine for me. I mean, I feel like then in September we'll get, kind of the wrap up of your work, and then the next September we could do the next evaluation if that works for Dr. Robinson. I like the idea that we get to understand what work has been happening, because that, I find value in it.
Mrs. McQuinn.
Another piece that that has been on my mind, and this seems like an appropriate time, is also when I talked to Ms. Rico, she said that she had discussions with all of the board members ahead of time. It's that we cannot set her replacement up for failure, meaning that the department, and I know that she'll be working closely with Ms. Bernard, they're going to have to drop off some things that they do. And I don't want that to reflect poorly on Ms. Bernard down the line. It's understood ahead of time. If we don't drop off some things that was being done or up to this point, then we're setting everyone up for failure. So I think Ms. Rico assured me that was going to happen. I don't want us to come back later and say, well, under Ms. Rico, we did this. Why aren't you doing this? Well, we're not doing it because we're down a whole attorney.
Very good point, Mrs. McQuinn. I'm sure that we'll take that into consideration, that one attorney can't do the job of two and do all the things that the general counsel was doing before she took off on us and decided to go somewhere else. Is there any other discussion on Dr. Robinson's motion to amend to make sure the contract has that 6-month review period for salary purposes? If there's no more discussion, all in favor of Dr. Robinson's motion? Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Takes us back to the main motion. Ms. Brill?
It's now 7-0. I'm here.
Yes, I see you there. So it's 7-0. So thank you. Have you been here a long time?
No, unfortunately, I had to do something.
Okay, no problem. All right, that takes us back to the main motion to allow me to work with the general counsel and Ms. Bernard to bring back a contract with that provision in it for a 6-month review for salary purposes. We have, we'll take a vote on that motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next item on the agenda is FMP06. Mr. Superintendent?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I recommend the board receive and accept the monthly purchasing and disbursement report as submitted.
Mrs. Bass?
That's item FMPF1. That should be your second one. That's the recommendation he just read.
Yes, he read the right recommendation. I read the wrong number. My eyes are giving out.
I apologize for not stating the
No, you did it right. You did it right, Dr. Fenoy. So we have a motion. Who made the motion? Mr. Shaw made the motion, seconded by somebody. Ms. Brill. Any discussion? All in favor? No discussion.
Yeah. Yes, discussion. It's Dr. Robinson. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I pulled this to resume my monthly protest on this agenda item. If you look at it, I know that Mr. Burke and crew are working to improve the data collection. But the question that I want to ask now, to be clear, because in looking at this report, we have, for example, the monthly summary report of disbursements. And we have, I want to make sure that the district certified small businesses that's listed as 7.6% includes some MWBEs. My question is, can we sort out that data so that you can tell me within the SBEs who is getting the money? Male, female, Black, white, Latino, Native American, whatever. Can we pull that data so that we know who we're actually contracting with and sharing the wealth with?
Dr. Robinson, we'll work with Mr. Burke and we'll bring that information back. We'll capture that. We'll bring it up in executive cabinet.
Okay.
All right, is there any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion, Dr. Robinson's opposed. Motion carries 6-1. Next item is FMP06, Mr. Superintendent, consultant agreement with Kurt Burfield.
Yes, sir. I recommend the board approve the consultant agreement with Kurt Burfield for the period of July 27, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, and authorize the superintendent and board chair to finalize and sign all necessary documents.
We have a motion. Motion by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Ms. Brill. There's no discussion. All in favor? Dr. Robinson, discussion?
I don't know who pulled it.
I pulled it.
Waiting. Oh, I'll wait for her.
Okay, Mrs. Anderson. I didn't realize you pulled it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, we have 3 consultant contracts on here. And I think they're from school police concerning the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act with background checks. I'd like for someone to come up here and talk to me and the rest of the board about how this relates. Is this money coming out of the operating budget, or it says police budget with background checks? We've been doing those before because we've been hiring police ongoing. So I need someone to tell me where this money is coming from for 3 consultants. I know at $30,000 a piece, maybe somebody doesn't think it's a lot of money, but we are in critical times here. But it could be because the state requires us to do it. And how do we do it before, or are we behind? I need some explanation. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Burke, through the superintendent.
Mr. Burke, you can answer that if you're available.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening. So these contracts, I'm familiar with them, because they run through purchasing. They also went through our waiver committee where we've, kind of scrutinized all potential purchases. This is something that's been done for years. The money does come out of the school police general fund operating budget, so it's operating dollars. But with new hires of officers, there's pretty extensive background checks that must be done, and we have a limited number of detectives. So these contracts are in place to allow them to outsource these background checks. It's really the ultimate spend is going to be based on how much hiring we do. Just the board's giving us authority to basically have a team of potentially 3 outside, contracted detectives. It doesn't mean that we'd spend $30,000 with each of them, or the whole $90,000 in aggregate. But this was something that the school police department felt like they need these consultants at their disposal if needed, and it is kind of routine to let them handle these background checks of officer candidates, so that our detectives are usually kind of consumed. We have a limited number of detectives, and we keep them pretty busy with investigations within the district. And these background checks require travel. They may have to go to the officer's hometown and do some background checks and dig a little deeper. So that's kind of, I think I've answered your question from the financial standpoint. School police did participate in the budget review this year, and we were very careful with them not to jeopardize our ability to keep our schools and students safe. But I do appreciate that they kind of contributed to the team effort to save money. And this was something they felt like they needed to hang on to. So we kept it in the budget for next year.
All right, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So I was going to pull these 3 also. Because aren't we past our hiring spurt? Like when we had to make sure we had a sworn law enforcement officer in every school, we were in crunch time, and we needed to have all hands on deck to recruit and screen and hire, right? And I understand that, but hasn't that slope decreased? I mean, why do we need 3? I just need somebody like kind of convince me. I don't get it.
I agree with your assessment. I think we're definitely on the downswing as far as the level of hiring of new officers. I did talk to Chief a little bit. I think he likes having the pool to draw from, maybe for availability, or even just, to keep.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a team of people to pull from, so we're not totally dependent on one particular investigator. So I think that was part of the rationale. And again, I'd be surprised if we spent all this money this year. This is typically the agenda item I guess we bring to the board. You know, if the 30,000 is not needed, we will not utilize it.
The other part of that, if I may, this is Wanda Paul, is that, you know, we have people retiring and taking new jobs and stuff. So this is a constant replenishment of our police staff, of our police officers. So, you know, this is definitely needed. And I also agree with what Mr. Burke said, in the sense that if we don't need to use the consultants, we won't. But it's a very intensive background check every time we hire a new police officer. And this is based on, I believe, FDLE requirements that we do these background checks.
Mrs. Whitfield was next, then Mrs. Andrews, and then Dr. Robbins.
I was just going to reiterate the same thing. I talked to Chief Kitsero about this as well, because I thought it was weird to have 3 contracts. But he mentioned that it's, you know, they don't all get used at the same time. So I think it's just the availability. And as they spend the money, they will spend the money just as needed. So 1 contract or 3, it wouldn't matter. They're going to spend the same amount of money, no matter how many people we have contracted for it. So that was all I learned from my conversation with him. So I thought I'd share.
But Mrs. Andrews.
And so if that's the case, from what Chief Kitsero said, why couldn't we bring these back to the board when the money is running out? That's why I was concerned about 3. And also with the new rules of police and the shootings and the killings that's happening right now, and the new rules that's coming down from Congress as well as in other places, I'm hoping that all of this is going to be actually a part of these checks here, because as you know, police officers go from one place to the other, and this is part of the problem that we're dealing with so many Black men and people being killed because they can go from one place to the other. Now we're spending $90,000 on consultants, and all these rules that are actually being put in place by Washington as well as all around with many local forces now. Apparently there have been some slips in there because people can go from one place to the other. So I'm hoping we're spending all this money on consultants doing these background checks. They're really looking at this new legislation and these new laws that's coming up so that we won't have these people within our school district with these backgrounds where they've had issues from one place to the other.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Yes, so several things. My first question is there something time sensitive about these contracts?
So these contracts are getting us prepared for the upcoming school year. The term is from July to June 30th of next, of 2021. It's really to get contracts in place so the police have them available for the upcoming fiscal year. So there is some time sensitivity. The existing agreements with these consultants are going to sunset, and they will be without that service if the board does not approve.
So, okay. So I have, okay. So I'm going to trust staff on this. I have my, my spidey senses kind of going off a little bit here, but I want to request this information. So I would like to know what is included in that background check. So for example, to the point Mrs. Andrews is making, since we have no national database at this point of law enforcement officers and accusations against them in terms of how they've interacted with the public, whether it's been use of force or other accusations, do we look for that as part of our background? Do we know that if an officer has had complaints of excessive use of force, are we going to X them from consideration to be part of our school police? And then what other things are part of that? The second thing that I would like is just numbers in terms of maybe going back 3 years, how many officers we hired in the fiscal year and how many consultants. Because I don't know, like I'm gonna walk with you here, Mr. Burke, but it just seems, and I get the whole not to exceed deal, been around a little while. I get all that. But it just seems to me that the hiring requirements, the needs, the numbers have slowed down, have decreased, and that we should not need the same number of outside consultants to do this work that we needed last year, right? And so, I'm walking with you here, but I just need some information as follow-up to convince me that I'm voting the right way, even though it'll be retrospective.
Yeah, Dr. Robinson, Chief Kitzenrow and his entire team are preparing their workshop, and we'll add that data to that workshop.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes, thank you. Related to the workshop, I would like for Ms. Rico to, advise and talk to the superintendent about whether or not some of this should maybe better be handled in a closed session, dealing with security, because I know there's still a grand jury investigation going on. There are still requirements. I'm not sure that even though hiring's slowed down, that we're in compliance with all of the requirements that the state's put on the number. So before we schedule a workshop, this may be something that should be done in a closed session. So I'd like for us to consider that.
Okay, Mrs. Rico, you'll work with the superintendent and make a determination whether we can do this publicly or not.
Certainly, we'll review the content of the workshop for any exemptions to public disclosure.
All right, thank you. Any other board members want to discuss this? All right, we'll take a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. The next item, Mr. Superintendent, is a similar item, FMP07.
Yes, I recommend the board approve the consultant agreement with Vincent Mentis for the period of July 27, 2020 through June 30, 2021, and authorize the superintendent and board chair to finalize and sign all necessary documents.
Okay, that was actually FMP08. We'll get back to FMP07 in a minute. On that recommendation, do we have a motion? Motion by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Mrs. Whitfield. Any discussion? Assuming the same discussion we just had will be the same discussion we'll go forward. Mrs. Andrews?
Yeah, just have one. Are these the same men from last year? These are the same consultants? Just want to be clear on that. Are these different people?
Dr. Fenoy, is Chief Kitzenrow still around? Yeah, there he is.
If Chief is on, he can answer the question. I honestly don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, those are the same people from last year. And just to answer a couple of the questions, the backgrounds are very, very extensive. I think anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And Ms. Andrews, you bring up a good point about making sure that we check prior histories. We go through each candidate's personnel file. We look at all their IA cases. We go through every piece of information. And that's why it takes so long, 30 to 90 days, to do each one of these. There's a lot of review that goes in there. And then the other thing, one of the reasons why I've asked for these three contracts to move forward is because we're not the only police department that these background investigators work with. So, consequently, there are times when we may need them, but they're doing backgrounds for someone else. And so as much as possible, we like to use our own detectives, but as the workload increases, and it fluctuates, we want to have the ability to go back and rely on these folks to help us with that. Because as Ms. Paul brought up a little bit ago, predominantly now we're dealing with folks that are retiring or leaving the profession, those types of things. So I hope that answers your questions.
All right, if there's no further discussion, we'll vote on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. FMP07, Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, sir. Let me make sure I'm getting it right. I recommend the board receive the file and audit of NAPA compliance report number 2020 through 20. Is that correct?
No, sir. You skipped over when we have those three consultants. We did one and we did three, but Robert Brand is the one in the middle. You're allowed to make mistakes. That takes the heat off of me because I've already made a couple myself. So
I'm so confused. All right.
Recommendation for FMP07. Yes, go ahead and read the recommendations for FMP07.
7. Okay. I recommend the board approve the consultant agreement with Robert Brand for a period of July 27, 2020 through June 30, 2021, and authorize the superintendent and board chair to finalize and sign all necessary documents.
No motion? Motion by Mr. Shaw, second by Mrs. Whitfield. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Now, Mr. Superintendent, IG1.
All right. IG1, I recommend the board receive and file the audit of NAPA compliance report number 2020 through 20.
Motion by Dr. Robinson, seconded by Ms. Brill. Discussion? Dr. Robinson.
Okay, thank you. So I just pulled this to ask the question because sometimes I think we take too long or we fail to close the loop. Has transportation received the input from the legal department on clarifying this contract language and ensuring that NAPA complies with the payment terms of agreement and even seek this small amount of reimbursement? Has that taken place?
The response, they indicated they are moving on it and we're going to follow up on it. We'll follow up on it.
Okay.
We'll make sure the money is back, yes.
I'm sorry?
We'll make sure the money is back to the school district.
Yeah, but I want to make sure we also close the loop on the contract link so we don't end up in this situation again.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll make sure it happens, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Mrs. McQuinn, you were moving your mouth, but I didn't hear anything. Did you want to speak? Okay. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to. If there's no other discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next item is Personnel Addendum P3, Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, sir. I recommend the board approve the personnel addendum as submitted.
Mr. Barbieri, we didn't hear you.
Dr. Robinson, did you have your hand up for discussion? Yes. No, I don't hear you.
I was trying to make the motion. We can't hear you, Mr. Barbieri.
Okay, yeah, it's one of those days. I just should have taken a plane trip somewhere. So we have a motion and a second. We need discussion. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Mr. Superintendent, that'll take us to P1.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I recommend the board approve the personnel agenda as submitted.
Motion by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Mrs. Whitfield. Any discussion? Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. I need to get a better sense of what we are doing. So we heard from two people today, a speech language pathologist. I think that might be a different issue than what I'm talking about. And we also got an email from somebody who apparently is in transportation, but is a certified teacher, if I'm understanding this correctly. So I think that maybe I was thinking about what was done in the past, like 10 years ago or whatever, where we had this very intentional effort to take certified teachers who were working in central office and curriculum and other places and put them back in the classroom when we had the tough budgetary times and we also needed teachers in the classroom. But now it seems that we're moving other people. And I just need to get a sense of the rationale. How are we deciding who gets moved? Aside from issues related to evaluations, how is HR figuring out who gets moved, who we are taking and trying to help get placed someplace, and who we're just saying this is where you're going or you don't have a job? I kind of need some rationale.
Dr. Robinson, thank you for that question, but I think the first part is a budgetary explanation. And I don't know if, Mike, you want to jump in and explain that budget piece and the budget reduction.
I got the budget part. I understand the why. I'm asking you the how. How are we going about this? Who is it? In what positions? By what criteria are people being taken from their current job situation and being placed someplace else, kind of against their will, so to speak? How are we deciding that?
And I will defer again to Mike.
I'll just start. I mean, I think the conversation begins with the respective department head or division chief, because that's where we started the budget exercise, to go through and look for potential reductions, to save money. So that's where these positions initially got identified, and then there's a handoff after that process where it gets handed off to HR, and then they jump in and try to work with the employees to find them another position. So, I guess it's a two-part question, perhaps, Dr. Robinson. If we want to know why the transportation department felt like they could, if they had to give something up, why they picked X position, they may be able to speak to it. And then the second part of that, as far as when HR then has these employees that are certified teachers, and they look across the vacancies in our schools and try to find a good fit. So it sounds like you may have questions on both aspects of that, and I hope that's helpful.
May I follow up?
Go ahead, Dr. Roberts. Go ahead and follow up.
So, I see some other hands up. So let me just ask this one piece, since Mr. Burke is on the screen right now. So were there any departments that were exempt from that 10% budget cut exercise? And as a subset of that question, what percent was cut from school police?
So we handled it. We didn't want to just say it's a flat 10% across the board cut. We wanted to try to be a little more strategic than that. But we did set a target of 10%, and then we charged each division chief. So each of really the superintendent's direct reports. So for me, I had to look across finance and IT and see what savings I could come up with. Ms. Paul was, she's got a large division, so she was looking at transportation, maintenance, all of that. So there was no set requirement by department, but each chief was trying to get to 10% for their respective group. I will tell you, with school police, I'm going to have to go back and research your question a little bit, because we eased up there. We looked, there was, some vacancies that we did not feel comfortable pulling out of their budget. We didn't quite get to 10%. When you look at everything we did across the whole district, it came in at about 8%. And that's because when we went through kind of the final review with the superintendent, we made some decisions. We said, and we had learned from some lessons past, right? We put some positions back into maintenance that were on the chopping block because of our history there. And we still did pull some vacancies out of maintenance, but it could have been worse, I guess. And we were thinking we don't want to completely, cripple any department. And then school police is another one. It just has such an important mission now. And with the Stoneman-Douglas Act, we didn't want to do anything to jeopardize their work. And it's also supported by the referendum. So I can tell you school police is not at 10%. It's going to be significantly less, but I need to go back and do the math and get back to the board and give you a written response on that to make sure I get it right.
Yeah, I think it's also important. I mean, operations was the biggest challenge. Originally, if we swept out back everything, we would have took almost 100 bus driver positions. So we made a decision to not do that. So that was sort of the final collective. And then on the academic side, there were some things that the academic team just couldn't give up either. So the rest of us, so like my personal budget, I have a very small personal budget, but I think mine is in excess of 25%. So it just depended on how we got to a number that gave the board a cushion to deal with what happens whenever, the numbers come out about our budget in the future.
All right. Dr. Robinson, do you have another follow-up? No. Okay. Ms. McQuinn?
Yeah, and excuse me, yes, use my proper language. This is actually in my question, or my comment relates back to questions you asked for P1, but it's about the same topic. So I'm going to use it. When we had the discussion about employees being non-reappointed other than for performance or discipline reasons, the responses each time included that employees being reappointed to teaching positions some being excessed, that will be placed in other positions if available. And so my question is, do we have positions available for all of those employees if they were not performance or discipline issues?
Yes, I believe the answer to that question is yes. It'd probably be better coming from Dr. LaCava that he would be able to speak to that with more authority and certainty. But Dr. LaCava, what's your take?
No, I think that's why we, Mrs. McQuinn, that's why we created that reassignment pool. And we are continuing to look for jobs for, I believe, 9 employees that we have not found a job for them right now. But we're going to continue to look. That's part of our HR process, and HR partners are looking on how we can move them out of the reassignment pool and find them a job.
Okay, so follow up, please. So it's possible that 9 employees may literally not have a job?
No, we're going to keep them in the reassignment pool until we find them a job. But we're going to continue to pay their salary and benefits until we do so.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. So I saw the message from Ms. Sanchez as well, and I remember she was quite a good transportation employee. I've actually had a chance to tour around with her, and so I was curious if after we get the budget results, if they're not quite as severe as we imagined, would we be going back to these employees and trying to bring them back to their positions that they were in, or how is that going to work?
So the way I envision it is, if the money comes back in the affirmative, then we come back to the board and talk about how we put the money back. I don't think because we've learned a lot about just being in distance learning around efficiencies. There's a lot to figure out, right? And so I would propose that if the budget comes back and we're up, then we have a conversation with the board around how we piece this thing back together with whatever money is available. But once we put people in their jobs, I think they just need to work. And then we keep moving from there.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. And I was happy to hear that the people will have a job. But my 2 questions, we get quite a few questions to the board office, to the board, from these people that are having anxiety right now as to what's going on with them. And I just need to make sure that there's someone over in human resources, if there's a special number or whatever, that people will be connected with. They're home right now. As I say over and over, we're in a pandemic. They are not out. They're in their house and they're worried. And I don't know if we have any EAP services or support services that are helping some of these individuals. It's great to know it sounds like they're going to have a job. Those folks that's in your, maybe in your pool that really don't have a job now and don't have any performance concerns and other things. But for even those that maybe had a performance concern, if they call that office over there in Human Resources, I'm hoping that there's somebody over there that will talk to them. When we heard about the lady today that's been working for us for 7 years, and this first year she's a speech pathologist and now she's out of a job, we have to have some compassion for these people and be able to talk with them and help guide them. You know, unemployment right now is at almost 16%, maybe going up to 20%. So we can't leave people out there. So I don't know if you have anything in place in the HR department that's that area that's going to be picking up the phone and counseling with people, or you could work with the EAP or somebody, you know, to help these people that will be out there. Even the ones sitting in your pool will get restless, especially with them still being at home. What do you have?
Mrs. Andrews, that's a great question and great statements. Just like every single year, we do have HR partners that are working with displaced employees. We have an EAP component of HR and ELR that are reaching out to some of these individuals. But unless they reach out to us, you know, in regards to EAP, sometimes we don't know what services specifically they need. But yes, we do have people on the phone. We are reaching out to them, and we're going to continue looking for work and jobs for each and every one of those individuals. But great question.
Yeah, just to follow up with that, because having been down there, there are other agencies that are available to help us with that. And you need to develop a plan of action so that even though you may not know right now what you need, but if you kind of go and zero out to find those agencies that will be able to help, when it does come in play that you may need to help somebody, you have something already identified?
Yes, we have a great relationship with Career Source, and we have a list of resources that we offer each and every one of the employees. So yes, we're here to help with anything that they need. Our customer service is number one in HR, but thank you very much.
So I'd like to ask a question, Dr. LaCava. So the way I looked at this, and maybe I just misread the numbers, it appears as though there are 6 employees that are being non-renewed, and possibly, I know there's probably some of those are disciplinary non-renewals, but are all 6 of them, if I'm reading it correctly, are there 6 employees that are totally being removed from our payroll? They're not put in any kind of pool, they're leaving it. And if so, are they all disciplinary non-renewals?
I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Mitchell.
Yes, you're right, Mr. Barbieri. Those employees that are listed as non-reappointment, those employees are out of a job with the district. And I believe we had that discussion with legal today, the non-reappointments have been reviewed by our legal staff, whether it's disciplinary or for budgetary reasons. So those have been reviewed. But like Dr. LaCava stated, we provide everyone with a list of resources, and we're here to assist anyone with whether they're going to seek employment again with the district or whether they're seeking employment elsewhere. We're here to help them.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question. Ms. Sanchez is she always, as far as I know, worked the South Area Transportation. I mean, that woman was, amazing in how she handled the parents in my district. I mean, there were constantly complaints at the beginning of the year and sometimes throughout the year. But, at the beginning of the year, there was complaints almost on a daily basis about somebody that didn't get picked up or the bus not being at the right place. I mean, she got involved every single time before I even got the call in the board office. I usually get the call after she'd already got involved. It was already handled before I ever got the call. But I mean, I hope that they're getting rid of Lydia Sanchez out of transportation, that there's somebody that's totally qualified to take over her spot, because she saved a lot of aggravation in my district for a whole lot of people by getting things taken care of immediately. So if Mrs. Paul is still here, I'd like to know that there's somebody, very, very, professional, trained to handle the issues down in the South area if there's problems with transportation, assuming we have transportation in the fall. Go ahead, Dr. Robinson. I guess there's Mrs. Paul. Mrs. Paul.
How you doing? Again, this was not performance related. This was budget, strictly budget. And the reality is that we had to unfortunately cut some good people. It is good that we have the opportunity to place them in another fund so they can continue to get paid, as well as to try to find them another great position in the district. But this is, again, I stress, this is not based on a bad performance evaluation or anything along those lines. This is just strictly trying to meet the budget requirements as we go forward.
So yeah, so I understand. I understand that the situation with everybody having to cut. But I guess my question is, if you're going to get rid of Lydia Sanchez, do we have somebody that's going to be able to handle that position when there's issues with transportation in my district?
Actually, Ms. Sanchez currently is working in training, so she's not in the South District. So we'll continue to use the personnel that we have down south to deal with any issues that may arise.
Okay, so she was moved out of there after the beginning of the year, because I know she was with us last year at the beginning of the year when I was having all those transportation issues. So,
yes, sir.
Great. Okay, thank you. Dr. Robinson, I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. So I think I have 3 things. So one, I sent the email in because I was going to try to avoid talking anymore, but I sent an email just asking for us to receive information later on the % cut by each department. I see how it's sorted by like the chief, but I just kind of want to see the % cut by department, so that can help me know where we place our values. The next thing is, I also need to understand, and I'm pretty certain that I said this before, but just to the point that Mr. Barbieri made, even though she's not still in that position, when we cut somebody, the question is who's going to do that work? Unless we think that the work was unnecessary, or unless we think that people can carry heavier loads than they've been carrying, then we're going to suffer, right? And which is why I need to see the percent cut by department, because I need to see where to expect the suffering to take place, so to speak. But then the last thing is, and I think Mr. Barbieri asked the questions, I'm just actually seeing these attachments that has this chart, summary of all funds, and then position changes. So when I look at this position changes chart, it says, it looks to me that we have 42.7 bus driver positions vacant. Am I reading this right? And tell me what that means. The next to the last column says vacant, right? And then it looks like when I go from the bus driver, maybe this is bus driver 1, that is 42 vacancies there. Does that mean that we have 42 bus driver 1 vacancies and we don't plan to fill them, thereby we will save money? Is that what that means? And then the same thing is 10 school police lieutenants. Am I understanding this chart correctly?
Yes, Dr. Robinson. I guess you're referring back to some of the budget information that was provided, and those numbers sound right. Those were vacant positions that we've recommended eliminating from the budget for next year. So we're gonna. Okay, so the wheels can go round and round with eliminating 42 bus drivers. I mean, we don't even know what's going to happen. We don't. There's still a considerable number of vacancies there, right? But you know, I should let transportation, I guess, answer that question as far as how they feel about their routing and their staffing levels.
Dr. Robinson, well, to the board, let me say this: we functioned this year with over 100 vacancies in transportation. So, and that's just the reality. So. And instead of taking all 100 plus back, we said we would take half. And then that way, if we need to hire those additional 47 people, then we would give that, then they can work with that 47. But to meet sort of the spirit of the exercise, they went ahead and did the 100 plus first. And then we said during the sort of the negotiation period, we'll put these back. So that's what her final number just on bus drivers alone was the 47 of vacant positions. And that's kind of how we did. But we've had well over 100 for over 6 months at this point. Okay, and 10 lieutenants of school police. I'm not on my game. I didn't even realize we had 10 lieutenants. Right. So those were proposed new positions to deal with the to help with the oversight of the additional officers. But again, in the spirit of the exercise, that is something that the chief of police gave back. And that's why it's sitting right there. So we approved them earlier. The board approved them, I guess, some months ago, but we never filled them. And so since we didn't fill them, the chief gave them back. Okay. So just to be redundant for the sake of clarity, when I'm looking at this, where it says vacant, that means that nobody lost their job, just nobody filled that position. It's been vacant. It will remain vacant. And so we're basically going to save money by not filling it. Yes, ma'am. However, I will say this, for transportation and police, as we move along, if the need is there, then we will come back to the board and say, we would like to add these 10 police officers, or we need to add another 20 bus drivers from that vacant pool. So I think our next exercise is to prioritize what comes back if the budget is in the affirmative. And then that's sort of the exercise. Yes, ma'am.
All right, there was another hand that went up. I saw it briefly. Ms. Brill.
Thank you. I just needed to find out what chart Dr. Robinson is referring to, because I don't have a chart and I'm having difficulty. There was a zip file there. It won't open on my computer. Is that where it was?
No, Ms. Brill, I believe that chart was part of the questions that I answered for last week's budget workshop. Okay. There was a kind of a whole several documents that we sent out, but yeah, they'd be in your email probably last week, Tuesday or Wednesday.
Thank you. And that I did.
Burke, if I misspoke about anything that I just explained, could you please follow up on that?
Dr. Fenoy, you were right on. there's been a couple comments made tonight about the budget, and I just want to share one thing about we may be in the woods for a while on the budget. You know, the governor now has received the budget, and he'll be working on his vetoes. And I think I explained, you know, that the FEFP is not something he can go through in line items. So we're going to probably get the budget that the legislature approved. And then we're going to, you know, cross our fingers and hold our breath that at some point in this next school year, there's not a need for a special session to cut that budget like we've experienced during the Great Recession. And other states across the country, their legislatures are now dealing with budget cuts. So that's why it's a little unsettling to say what makes Florida so special that we can manage this without having to cut our budget. But I want the board, I think we're going to have to be a little patient and really ride out most of next school year until we really know for sure if the funding is going to stay intact. So it's not like, you know, if the governor signs that budget July 1st, that doesn't mean that funding is going to hold all the way through next school year. You know, if we can make it to March or so, I'd start feeling a lot better. So I think this recession could be a 2 or 3 year event, you know, and we're going to just kind of, I'm under the mindset that we've got to continue to prepare ourselves and save money and make wise decisions until the economy improves. Because we are, you know, governments get hit by the recession just as hard usually as anybody else. It just takes a little longer to get to us sometimes. And nobody really knows what's happening with this, the duration of this recession, how long we're in for. So I think that's why I just don't want there to be an expectation that, you know, if we get to September 1 and the budget's still intact, that everything's great and we can just start, you know, going back to business as usual. I think we're going to have to monitor this for some time.
All right, Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. And as I listened to this discussion, I didn't have that list either, Mrs. Brill. But with all those vacant positions now, I remember just with bus drivers, you never have enough. You have a critical shortage. So you can be holding those back if you want to. But when you decide that you truly need them, they may not be there. So, you know, I don't know how that thought process is as we're still just doing surveys and town halls. And as we get closer to getting to where we need, do we even know how many buses that we'll need for next year and how much of this or that we'll need? Because people, hopefully with the economy the way it is, maybe they'll be waiting around and want to ride the bus. But I think we've got to really remember that we've had shortages in a lot of these areas and we're still in the pandemic and people may not want to do it anymore. So we've got to kind of hurry up and get busy so that we'll know what our real needs are so that we can do what we have to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And there is a lot of uncertainty about how many students and how many employees will show up next year.
Bye, Dr. Robinson.
The chart that I was referring to is attached as a Q&A on P1.
Are there any other questions or any further discussion? Are you all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. That takes us to BD1. It's a board discussion item. It's actually my discussion item. I was contacted by the